Welcome back to Seaside Joe, a Seahawks rebuild football podcast. I'm Kenneth Arthur. Throughout the offseason, started a couple months ago before all the big news. And the whole plan was just like, the Seahawks are coming off of a 7-10 season. That's unusual. Clearly, the roster is in need of some serious help to get back into contention in the NFC West. Why not do a podcast about how the Seahawks would be able to do that around Russell Wilson? And then, wouldn't you know it, that plan was at best laid as any other. So didn't work out that way. And I think that has only invigorated and excited the version in me that just loves doing dynasty mode on Madden and skipping all the games and just trying to build a contender from scratch. So that hasn't happened in over 10 years. And so it's very exciting to cover that from here on out. And there's nobody else in the world that I would want to do a podcast with about the Seahawks draft in this year, in this position, or at any time, but especially right now, than Rob Staton of Seahawks DraftBlog, and now the rebuild. Very excited after many years of the 3000 NFL mock draft podcast and a few years since our last show together. Rob, welcome back to the show. It's great to see you.
It's great to speak to you, Kenny. I remember fondly the shows that we did in the past, and also appreciate you mentioning Madden, because back in the day when Madden was good, I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. I love nothing more than going on that kind of like franchise mode and building up an amazing Seahawks team. And then kind of like as the years went on, a combination of Madden not being any good anymore and the fact that the Seahawks had a quarterback and had a good team meant it was less interesting, because I would be other teams. I'd like pick Cleveland or somebody like that, some with a couple of first round picks and a complete rebuild to go on Madden with. But now maybe buy a version of Madden, because there's a reason to be the Seahawks and go through the franchise mode again. If only they could repair that, so it would be more fun for the next few years.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't played actually any video games in a while until I just bought one this week just to try something new to keep my attention other than movies and TV. But that's besides the point. And maybe Madden would be a good one, because that's one, because I also don't do fantasy football. That's one that can really, I think, just ignite that, like we were saying, that ability to rebuild from scratch and to see what happens. I've always said that teams in the NFL don't truly rebuild, just because it's hard to have a really long-term vision for a team in the NFL, because the players come and go so fast. So there's that aspect to it. So there's also the part of it that, like, now that the Seahawks are in this position, of course they're rebuilding. Of course it's a rebuild, of course, but it was just sort of like almost the tear down of the rebuild part is unintentional. So it's like you're in the middle of a rebuild. It's like when you start a rebuild, you don't know it yet. That's like the Seahawks started the rebuild was like 2017, 2018, and they just didn't know where it was maybe headed at that point. And now here we are. And Rob, let's just start like with like a very good baseline here. What are your thoughts on the Seahawks having a top 10 pick in this draft? How do you feel about the 2022 first round class? And how do you feel about how that matches up with what the Seahawks should do?
Well, I think it's quite exciting, and maybe that's just because, I really like the draft and I write about the draft. And I think also the fact that the Seahawks had become, for me, a little bit stale over the last few years. I had no interest in watching a repeat of last season or even the season before. And I know a lot of people will say, well, they won 12 games. For me, I never really enjoyed the 2020 season. It never felt like I was watching a true contender. It felt like I was watching a bit like the Bears when they won 12 games a few years ago. They were a team that they happened to win 12 games. It was a decent regular season, but then they didn't make any noise in the playoffs, and neither did Seattle. So I wanted something different and new and embrace it. And I think you kind of have two choices when something happens like a Russell Wilson trade. You can either be really miserable and upset and sad that it's happened, or you can be positive about it and say, okay, well, how can I make the most of this situation? And well, I've got a month, 6 weeks of draft conversation to enjoy, and I think it is enjoyable. To think about their options, to look at a whole bunch of players that we've never been able to look at the top players in a draft for a decade now, and just sort of to embrace that. And I've kind of thrown myself into that personally. I think a lot of other people have done that and have probably taken some enjoyment from it. and we'll see how it goes. And I'm fully prepared. You know, I'm actually more excited about this season than last season, because I actually think there's every chance they'll probably win about 4 games this year. But I'm actually looking forward to, well, if they do, they'll be in a great position next year to get a great quarterback, a great young quarterback. I'm a little bit excited about, as the losses mount, you know, sort of watching the college games again and seeing these college guys playing and thinking, imagining them for the Seahawks and thinking what they could do. I think that's quite exciting in a way. And we've seen with teams like, look at the Bengals, for example, you know, it didn't take them that long to go from a really horrendous team to a team in the Super Bowl. It basically took 2 off seasons. So I don't think this has to be a 5-year process. This could be a 2-year process if you get it right. Admittedly, you're probably going to need to find your version of Joe Burrow and maybe even your version of Jamar Chase. Maybe you've got that, but you know, a player of similar impact value in order to get to that point, and you've got to sign well in free agency. But I think, yeah, I think the Bengals have shown you can turn things around quickly. So bring it on. Let's do it. Let's see what happens over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you know, even before the Seahawks had a top 10 pick and no Russell Wilson, even before then, it was hard not to look at the 2023 draft and think, wow, those are some quarterbacks. That is a class, and that is a top of the class that could rival the Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes impact, with guys like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud at the very top. You know, and then there's just a handful of other guys that could really take that step next season to become a legitimate number 1 quarterback as well. So there's that aspect to it, where now the Seahawks can be open to, you know, get a guy who the Seahawks have never had the number 1 pick ever. And if that's what happens, that's what happens. You know, the fact that they did add that second Broncos pick does mean that, yeah, they can move up if they end up 5 and a team with a quarterback ends up 1, and you know, they'll be in that position to move up. So yeah, I agree that that's going to be a very exciting aspect to it. This year, it seems like if you wanted to prepare for that, obviously there's nothing that seems to be more obvious right now than the fact that the Seahawks might have the worst, probably definitely have the worst tackles signed for next season in the NFL. So how obvious do you think it would be, or is that kind of a red herring as far as the Seahawks and an offensive tackle this year in the draft?
I think if you look at whether they are right now, when I did a mock draft recently, I did put a left tackle at number 9, because there's a gaping hole at the moment. So it'd be unwise to think that they wouldn't consider a left tackle. But then when Pete Carroll spoke on the radio, I'm speaking about the interview we had on KJR in Seattle. I thought he spoke with a sense of urgency about the left tackle position, that he felt like they were going to have to do something now. And, you know, there are still some options there. You know, Dwayne Brown's a very short-term option. Eric Fisher is more of somebody, you know, could potentially fill a hole for 2 or 3 years, at least until you find a younger left tackle. So, you know, they're 2 players that could come in and start and you can feel reasonable about. And I can imagine maybe the Seahawks are looking at that. And there are some right tackles out there. You know, Darrell Williams might be an option, somebody like that who could come in and start. So I actually think that the way that Carroll spoke, my sort of takeaway from that was that they'll probably try and fill at least one of those holes before the draft. But if they don't, then it becomes a very real prospect. I think Trevor Penning is the guy to keep an eye on there. He fits a lot of what the Seahawks look for. He's huge, 6'7", 325 pounds. He ran a 4.89, which is a remarkable 40 for a guy who's that size. He's an explosive tester. That is something the Seahawks have spent a lot of time on. He's long. He's got a very aggressive playing style. If you watch any of his tape, his highlights videos are basically just a collection of, you know, him making contacts, but then, you know, judo tossing the defender to the ground. He's a fantastic run blocker. I think the problems with Trevor Penning, and this is why it gives me pause, Kenny, is that, and the Senior Bowl showed this up, he was very susceptible to the inside counter. Any kind of like inside move he was worried about. And you could see it was playing on his mind. So then he was compensating for that. And then he didn't have any balance or anchor. He couldn't reset. People were getting into his pad. So if the inside move, if he was shutting it down because he was conscious of it, then people were just driving him backwards and were converting speed to power. And they did try him at right guard during the Senior Bowl as well. And my concern with Penning is that, you know, there are some teams who might go, we'll take him to play left tackle, and if he moves to guard, then fine. But I think for the Seahawks picking at 9 overall, if they're taking a left tackle, they need a left tackle. They need a cornerstone left tackle if they're going to take one there. I don't think Charles Cross is a cornerstone left tackle, by the way. He's undersized. He's not very athletic. He's very good at clinging on in the wide open passing system that Mike Leach uses and connecting and doing what he needs to do there in the passing game. I think he needs a lot of work as a run blocker. I don't think he is the athlete that you would take in the top 10. He hasn't got the size. I don't think that the Seahawks are going to go in that direction.
Would that push Charles Cross to the other side, to the inside at the next level? Would it just mean that he has the potential to not be a starter at all?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I saw a bit of talk that, they're already saying, he could play left or right tackle. And I always think that's a bit of a red flag because you don't often hear people who've played left tackle very well in college and are being projected as top 10 picks switching to the right side. It's usually if you are in that position, you play left tackle. When I watched him, like I said, I think he just holds on. I think he engages people. I think he's fine. He does lock on pretty well. I'm not saying I think he's going to go in the first round. I'm not saying he's a bad player. I just, from an athletic perspective, I don't see him as the kind of player that you would take in the top 10, and I don't think the Seahawks will go there. So a long answer to sort of say I could see it with Penning. I think it's really only him though, because I don't think Evan Neal's going to be there, and I think he's a guard anyway. I think Ekwonu's a guard as well. So I think it really is just Penning. But then listening to Carroll again, to go back to that interview, what do you need to get done, Pete? What are your priorities? And he answers, we've got to fix the pass rush. We've got to get pass rushers in. We've got to be more aggressive there. And then he mentioned coverage. That's really important too. Today I spoke to Coach Jim Levitt, who was a coach with Vic Fangio at the San Francisco 49ers, who was his linebackers coach. And he said he felt that cornerback was the most important position in Fangio's scheme, that was really vital. So I'm just wondering, I would never put any kind of money on the Seahawks taking a cornerback early, because we've been there, done that, haven't we, Kenny? Right. But I just wonder if, let's imagine a scenario where, Aiden Hutchinson's going to go number 1. Kayvon Thibodeau is probably going to go in the top 7. Trevon Walker's going to go in the top 5. I think Jermaine Johnson will be gone by number 8. If those guys have gone, who are you taking? It could be Penning, but it could be Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley Jr. And I think if you take Stingley Jr. or Sauce Gardner, you're getting a really good player.
I think like when you mentioned the history with the cornerbacks and the high thing, it's like there's so many ways to maybe look at that. When one hand, it's like we also have a sample of one when it comes to the number of top 10 picks that Pete Carroll and John Schneider have ever had. So when we're talking about a sample size of one, it's like, and then you got Earl Thomas, who is a defensive back, and obviously they've shown a propensity for safeties. And maybe it's just that the fact that, hey, this will be their first opportunity to really get a potential CB1 in the draft of prototypical size and production and speed and all the things that maybe you would look for there. So yeah, that'll be an interesting way to find out if the Seahawks do in fact could value a cornerback like that above these other, and that's the other thing, they have so many needs that it's like there's so many ways that they could make the team better. I mean, really, like it's hard to not make the team better with the pick unless they do select, and I don't know if it's controversial, a quarterback, but it's hard not to make the team better with one of these picks, I think, even in a somewhat weaker class. But getting back to the offensive tackles, speaking of like weak, strong, it's been called a deep class. And yet at the same time, I'm not hearing anything that makes me feel good about any of the offensive linemen in the draft. If you're talking about like, hey, here's this guy, at least if you draft him, he's a really strong, even a right tackle, you would say, some sort of strong tackle, because everybody comes with some sort of caveat, whether it's Evan Neal or Ike Ekwonu, or everybody except for Tyler Linderbaum, who's only a center, comes with some sort of caveat where it feels like if Russell Okung and Trent Williams, the 2010 draft, were in this draft, they'd go 1-2 just like that. Because it just feels like there's a big separation. Is that the way that you feel? Is there anybody in this class at the offensive tackle position, even maybe like a day 2 pick, that makes you very excited? Like, that's the guy that I'd go get?
There is, but I think you make a really good point there. I think that is a good assessment of the offensive line group, that it is a whole bunch of players. And look, people have, I at the moment, so I've done a horizontal board, and I've recently sort of separated what I would say is sort of true first round players to sort of players that I think deserve to be fringe first. And then I've gone 2, 3, 4, 5 to 7. And, the only offensive lineman I've got as a true one is Evan Neal. I think he's going to be a guard. I think he's sort of like a Brandon Scherf type player. He could have that kind of impact as a guard. Kwonu and Zion Johnson, who tested superbly, I've kind of got in that fringe range. But again, I've got them both as guards. Then at tackle, I've got Trevor Penning in the fringe 1-2, and I've got Abraham Lucas. And to answer the last part of what you were asking there, Abraham Lucas is the guy that I really like at Washington State. I think that he's completely undervalued, totally underrated, had a really good Senior Bowl, was the best looking tackle, I thought, at the Senior Bowl in terms of an athletic frame with length. If you had to sort of say, what do you want your tackles to look like? It's Abraham Lucas. I thought he was absolutely outstanding at the combine. Of all the offensive linemen who did the drills on field, he was by far the best, and nobody talked about him. There was absolutely no talk. It was a real poor show from the NFL Network that they spent no time talking about him, because he was absolutely terrific, and it wasn't even close. So I think he's a first round. I've kind of got him in the fringe 1-2. Part of me doesn't even know why, because I should just put him in 1, because I've not seen anything so far that makes me think to second guess this guy. I think you keep him at right tackle. That's where he played at Washington State. I think at the worst, he's going to go sort of late first. But if you look at some of these other websites, and listen, I don't really know what's going on with some of these projections at the moment.
Yeah, we got to get to the mock drafts here eventually, because that's interesting.
People have him like round 3, round 4, and I'm thinking, well, what are you seeing? Like, let me pick out 30 players that you've got graded ahead of him, and let's run through why that's ridiculous. I don't personally get it. But then, just quickly on the rest of the class, there's sort of a lot of players that you think, I'm not sure. See, Rasheed Walker hasn't tested the combines, got 33-inch arms. His play is really hit and miss at Penn State. I really like Abina Etzer, who was at Memphis, and then he transferred to TCU. I think he's athletic. I think he's got a lot of potential, but he's somebody who I think, is worthy of a grade sort of round 3, but he's going to go day 3, and you sort of try and work on him and train him up. A lot of people like Tyler Smith. Again, I think he's a massive project. I think probably middle rounds, but some people are talking round 1. Bernard Ryman's got short arms. You mentioned Tyler Linderbaum. I think there's massive question marks with him. He's tiny. He's got 31-inch arms. He's not done any testing at all, so we don't know anything about his athletic profile. Do you know what? There is one player, Kenny, I think, apart from Abraham Lucas, who on the offensive line, who I think really, truly deserves some lofty praise, and it's Cam Jurgens, the center at Nebraska. I think he's a fantastic player, a bit like Abraham Lucas, completely underrated. If you want a center who is just going to, really get after opponents up front, play with an aggressive style, incredibly explosive, very athletic. There's a clip, if you can put his name into Twitter and you'll find select videos or media, whatever it is, and you'll see a clip of him reaching to the second level, finding a defensive back. He didn't just drive him, he drove him 40 yards downfield and then threw the defensive back to the ground at the end of the play and got a ridiculous flag for it. But it was just a great thing to watch, that you've got your center there, and as the play's kind of unfolding 40 yards away, he's just driving this little defensive back downfield. And that's the kind of attitude I think you want from a center. That when I think of offensive linemen, I think of that, and he's like, I just think he's a proper football player. And I would want someone like Cam Jurgens on the team. And I think he's going to be late first, early second, very underrated. If, there's a lot of things I want the Seahawks to do in this draft. If you told me they could get Cam Jurgens of this class, that would get a celebration in my front room watching the draft on draft night.
And by the way, if you're here from Seaside Joe, please go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com. But Rob, can you tell them what the new URL redirect will be?
Yeah, so I mean, we're kind of playing around with it. Initially we were going to completely revamp everything to the rebuild with this the-rebuild.com or the rebuildpodcast.com. What I think we're going to do now is the podcast is going to be called The Rebuild, and we're going to sort of have still retained SeahawksDraftBlog.com. So everything's still going to be on SeahawksDraftBlog.com. It might be a little bit confusing, and I apologize for that. But, why not confuse people during the biggest off-season the Seahawks have had in a decade? But the podcast is the Rebuild the Seattle Seahawks podcast. Please check it out on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. I think it's on everything now. So if you follow on the other platforms, then go for that. But SeahawksDraftBlog.com, you'll find everything on there. And if you want to use the RebuildPodcast.com, eventually there'll be a website. It's going to look very different very soon, but there'll be a website where all of those URLs send you to the same place. So even if you just want to call it something completely different yourselves, then go for it. Let's give the thing 10 names. If you go to those URLs, you'll find the site.
All right. Yeah. But yeah, definitely start with SeahawksDraftBlog.com if you haven't familiarized yourself. I imagine most of you have been, because Rob, you're my favorite draft analyst. So it's great to have you covering the Seahawks. So interesting stuff there. And if you're listening to this on the Seaside Joe podcast, I'll be putting up the video on YouTube at the Seaside Joe YouTube channel. And I don't know how you can find it, but I'll put that in the link of the description of the article. Let's move on. But yeah, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Let's move on. Well, really quickly, would you trade pick 40 and the third round pick if you got a sense that you had to move up in the end of the first round to get Cam Jurgens?
No, because I think there's about 25 players that I'd quite like at the top of round 2. And in a draft like that, I'd rather keep the picks. And I think the third round is going to present a lot of value. And look, and people might say, well, you've got a lot of draft stock. I think people have been talking about this as well next year as well. I don't want to. The only trading that I want to see really happen is trading down a little bit in certain spots. Like at 41, if they move to 50, I'd be happy with that if they get like a 4th round pick. That's the kind of thing. At 9, I'd probably rather than move up than down, unless the guy they were going to take at 9 is definitely going to be there at, say, 12, and then you just flip picks, whatever. I'm happy with that. But I think it's such an amazing draft class. The only thing it doesn't have are those Trevor Lawrence quarterback types at the top of the first round. I think everything else is great, and I love this draft. And I like the next draft. I mean, you touched on it very briefly. I mean, let me just read 5 names out for you. I mean, this is how good the draft's going to be next year at the top end. You've got the quarterbacks, and Kentucky's Will Levis is my favorite quarterback for next year. I think he's the guy to keep an eye on personally at quarterback. But apart from that, Will Anderson is a generational player, defensive end at Alabama. I mean, he had something ridiculous like 31 tackles for a loss last season. He is insane. He is a legendary player in the making. You've got Michael Mayer. Anybody who's watched Notre Dame, an unbelievable tight end. He is incredible. I don't know if people watched the Rose Bowl, but if they did, they'll have seen Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State, the receiver. My word, he is better than the 2 Ohio State receivers who are in the draft this year, probably going to go in the first round. So it's a star-studded top of the draft, and
that's a good point.
Keep every pick you've got, because hey, I'm just saying, if Russell Wilson injures another finger and you get 2 top 10 picks, the Seahawks didn't expect Jamal Adams to be the number 10 overall pick. You never know what's going to happen, do you? So I'd want to keep everything for next year as well.
That's very true. I mean, yeah, and the last couple of weeks have shown how quickly the makeup of teams can change from the very core center of what you think is the corner, the very cornerstone of your franchise can change teams. So yeah, very good point. And yeah, getting extra draft capital. That's why I think this draft capital for 2022, I mean, you got 9 first round picks that have changed hands already. And it's like teams are being very more movable, I think, with a little bit those picks. And it's fascinating. I mean, you think about it now, it's fascinating. The 49ers and the Rams, they've traded away their 2023 first round picks already. And, they're not going to have that capital next year or this year in this class. So that's an opportunity here for the Seahawks with 3 first round picks in 2 years, 4 second round picks in 2 years to really start to build up what is a roster that I said has a lot of needs. I want to talk about that day too. Let me grab a question here from the Seaside Joe comment section where I put out for the readers there at seasidejoe.substack.com. I put out some opportunity to say, who do you want to draft? Tell me who you want here with the first pick. So Rob, maybe we'll go over a few of those and you can tell me your thoughts on what they say. Brian says, I still believe Jordan Davis is a generational talent needed in a 3-4 defense. What are your thoughts on Jordan Davis?
I love Jordan Davis. He's fantastic. And I've been a big fan. I thought he was going to declare for the draft last year and spent a lot of time talking about, this combine performance was not a surprise. He's been known as a fantastic, people who really dig into the draft stuff have known that he was an amazing combine tester in waiting. So it was, to sort of see it unfold that way was great because it just sort of reaffirmed everything that people kind of knew. He's lost 20 pounds since he was playing, and I think that's helped him with the testing. Is he a generational player? I mean, that's a difficult one to sort of agree with, I suppose, because is he better than Vita Vea? I'd probably say no. I mean, I saw Vita Vea live twice, and even though Vita Vea didn't run a 4.7 or 4.8 or whatever it was, he still moved better than any defensive tackle I've seen in space. I just unbelievable. And sometimes it's not necessarily how quick you run in a straight line. It's sort of that movement. And I think Vita Vea, the way that he controlled lines, is better than Jordan Davis. What does Jordan Davis do very well? He's quicker than you expect. He can shoot gaps better than anybody I've seen at 360, 340 pounds, whatever he plays at that kind of size. He is too upright, though. He can two gap very well, which is what you want a nose tackle to do, essentially. That's his role. It's to cover two gaps. Is he the kind of player you keep on the field for third downs? I'm not sure about that. And if he's only a two-down player, Kenny, I personally have a hard time, launching a rebuild, which is what it is, essentially, whatever Pete Carroll says, launching your rebuild with a two-down defensive tackle. I think that has to be more of a premium position, higher snap percentage player. But look, if they drafted Jordan Davis at 9, there'd be no complaints because, how could you be disappointed about drafting a 340-pound, 6'6" beast who's been compared to Aloti Nata at number 9 overall? So, by all means, fill your boots, Seahawks. If you want to take him, take him. I've got no complaints. I'm just not. I personally prefer pass rusher or cornerback instead first.
It's a great point, because there's that thought of, it's like you're going to draft a guy like Jordan Davis. You're getting a football player. You're getting a guy that's going to be a great member of your football team. Are you getting a guy that's going to impact the game in the modern football era as much as another player at a different position? It's the same question on the other side of the game line. Actually, you touched on it already, but KJ Willer says, we need to build from the ground up, go with a generational talent in the middle, like Tyler Linderbaum. Another thought of generational here. You touched on the concerns with the size. He's got 0 position versatility. He's going to be a center. Seems like he's going to have issues with certain players in the NFL, no matter what he does. And that, that's always been a problem for the Seahawks in the NFC West with Aaron Donald, and it's only going to continue to get more difficult, it seems like, with some of these other defensive tackles and defensive lines in the NFC West. But all I hear is that Tyler Linderbaum is the best center prospect that anyone has ever seen. Can you touch on, where exactly is Linderbaum's actual floor, and what range, where do you think he'll actually land in the draft?
I think he might be there at 40.
Wow.
I've got him as the 3rd best center.
Wow.
And he's a good player. That's the problem, isn't it? Because when you start, because that's not the consensus view, it sounds like I don't like him or I don't appreciate him. It's not that at all. Cam Jurgens has everything. He has everything. And I watched the video and I see the physical profile and the way that he plays, everything's there. And then I see someone like Cole Strange, who's exactly the same. Has shown a lot. He was great at the Senior Bowl, testing brilliantly. He's got the length, he's got the size, anchors his back very, very well. It's really hard for me to sort of put Linderbaum ahead of those two players when he's about 285, 290 pounds. He's got 31-inch arms. What does he do well? If people can go and dig this out, he actually had a wrestling match against Tristan Wirfs, who was also at Iowa. And he beat Tristan Wirfs. They were both good wrestlers in high school, and Linderbaum beat Wirfs. And people know Wirfs as the big offensive tackle who went in the top 15 for Tampa Bay a couple of years ago. So it goes to show what he's good at. When he gets in there and he gets hand placement and he controls and he can win, he's got that sort of the hips and everything like that. I think he's clearly an athlete, but I don't think he's going to test before the draft, so we'll never have confirmation of that. You know, when he gets hold of you and he gets inside, he gets his hands inside, he's very, very good at winning blocks and finishing blocks and creating openings. But he is what he is, and that's an undersized center, and he can get smothered and he can get pushed around a little bit. And when his hand placement isn't right, how does he adjust? And if he comes up against a 34-inch arm defensive tackle, let's say that Perry and Winfrey's got 35-inch arms at Oklahoma. Let's say those two squared off if Linderbaum had been eligible for the Senior Bowl or healthy for the Senior Bowl. All Winfrey has to do is sort of straight arm, one out. Travis Jones would have done this because he did it to everybody at the Senior Bowl. What does Linderbaum do there? How does he get into the frame of a defensive tackle? How does he do it? And at the next level, you know, if he kind of locks in to, you know, one of these big dudes who are playing interior at the moment, you know, let's think of somebody, even Al Woods, for example, right. They're going to have counters. They're going to be stronger. They're going to be quicker. They might be able to sort of smother him still. And if that initial sort of control there, if he's not controlling it initially and they counter, is he just going to get smothered in the way when he doesn't get the hand placement? So these are the kind of things. I think he's very scheme specific. I think, you know, before the Dolphins gave their pick away for Tyreek Hill, I thought end of the first round would be a good option for him for the Dolphins because they're kind of rebuilding their offensive line. But they don't have that pick anymore. So I'm not sure where he goes in the first round without testing and blowing everybody away with a brilliant testing profile. There is talk that he runs a ridiculous short shuttle. If he did that, all bets are off. I wouldn't know where he could go. He could go in the Garrett Bradbury range, which was I think 18th overall, because he was undersized as well. Kenny had similar issues, but he did well at the Senior Bowl and he tested at the Combine and he did well there. So Linderbaum's not done any of that. If he does a test, if he gets a pro day in before the draft, I'll reconsider this and see where we go. Right now, to me, he's a question mark, an injury question mark, a testing question mark, an undersized center. And center is, as we saw with Creed Humphrey, is not a position that teams draft early. So yeah, could he last into round two? Not beyond the realms of possibility, I'd say.
Yeah, and I mean, also you mentioned Garrett Bradbury. For those that don't know, also not really well liked by Vikings fans. And that center position is, I mean, the Vikings are still being linked to Linderbaum. You know, right after they, you know, to some degree. Well, like you said, who knows what? And there were, you know. There's what's interesting about the players who didn't test and what that'll mean. I have so many questions about like the Senior Bowl and everything, just because, you know, I've been trying to prepare more for this draft than any other draft. I love the draft. You know, we've known this for a long time. I've always loved the draft. My favorite day of the year, or used to be a days, whatever, weekend. But this one, I wanted to like, what if I like really looked at these prospects for a whole year? And, you know, with also looking at the NFL, when the NFL season starts, it becomes so difficult for me, at least, to track that. And so I'm learning so much more about like the things that I really don't know with regards to some of these prospects, their weaknesses and strengths, because, you know, it's all of us, you know, 98%, 99% of us who follow the draft are going kind of off of the narratives that we hear that trickle down from, you know, whether it's Mel Kiper or whatever, but the narratives that now there's so many people that have a voice from the beginning, like a Daniel Jeremiah or something like that. And if they say something, you know, that's taken very seriously. You know, if Daniel Jeremiah says, hey, Ike Ekwonu is my favorite player in the draft, he should go number one, that's going to impact things on those narratives. And it sounds like those narratives could be playing a part. I think we've seen it with quarterbacks here in the last couple of years in the first round and the first round talk, you know, and we get all these kind of first round busts at quarterback. And now I'm hearing it sort of when the way you're talking about some of these guys like Linderbaum, who I hear are generational. And then like maybe at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, actually, and I hear this about a lot of guys. I don't know if there's a guy, I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube, and I don't know how many of these top 10, top 15 prospects where I've heard this guy's actually being kind of little overrated. It seems like it's going around a lot, but then again, everybody has a different opinion on each prospect. Rob, what do you think about how in the modern era, with all the mock drafts, with the social media taking over, with sort of like opinions like Some of them are going to be amplified, and that opinion, it's just an opinion, but it's going to be amplified. Other opinions are going to be silenced. And on these prospects and these things, we're just kind of picking out the narratives at the end. Do you see you briefly mentioned seeing some of the mock drafts on Abe Lucas and being like, what's going on here? Do you see these narratives like really impacting and sort of distorting our perception of reality this year on the draft prospects?
I hate draft coverage. I hate it. And the reason is sort of, there's many dimensions to this. You've got a whole bunch of people who you would sort of consider draft media. And I won't mention any names because these are sort of, people who are not, really high level, secure contracts or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to call these people out, but, people will know who I'm talking about here. And they will tweet things out. And I've seen it this week at Pro Days. So-and-so is going to go in the top 5. A source told me, yada, 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 they're brilliant, that so-and-so likes them and they're going to go in the top 10. And what ends up happening is if you actually collected all of the tweets that some of these draft Twitter people who work for, maybe even work for companies like ESPN now, if you took all of their comments of who they think is going to go in the top 10, they'd have about 30 people in the top 10 by the time the draft comes around. And how the sausage is made is that they befriend people, agents, even players at some points. They're fed little bits. Hey, could you just, and look, as someone who has worked in the media for a long time, you get it, could you just put this out? Could you, you have to be sort of strong against that. Well, no, I'm not going to put this out there for you. And people get intimidated by it. If an agent's calling you and you're just somebody who isn't a chef, let's say, a big name in the media, or a Todd McShay or somebody like that, and an agent's go, hey, I'm so-and-so's agent. Can you just put this out there that this guy, we've heard this, we've heard that. You're going to share that information. You want to get on their good books. And it's no different really than sort of Adam Schefter scratching the back of a few agents to get a scoop ahead of Ian Rappaport, who's doing the exact same thing just for a different company. And that's how it goes around. And the draft media has got sucked into that. And there are very few people now who I read for their opinions, because what they generally do is just go with the consensus. They just sort of, everything's the same. And then you've got other people, and I will call Daniel Jeremiah out on this. Daniel Jeremiah basically speaks to his friends in the league and then tells you what they're saying. So, and I don't think he puts a lot of work in. So he will do a top 50 before the Senior Bowl, and then, write off 15 names of it the next week. And it's thinking, your job is to cover the draft for the NFL Network. You'd think he'd have a grasp on, the top 200 players in the class, or he'd actually done the homework. And Mike Mayock always was ahead of his brief. He refused to do mock drafts. He refused to get into any of that. He would sit at home and he would watch tape. And he would get to the combine and he'd be telling you a bit about every single player that he could. He didn't want to talk about, he didn't want any time for joking around like Daniel. Everything's a gag from Daniel Jeremiah with Rich Eisen. It's a quip, it's a pun, it's this guy's got the same name as a famous Motown singer. Let's reference that I've understood that they sang this particular song with Rich Eisen. It's that all the way through it. And Mayock could just sit there and go, this guy's done this, and I saw this tape against Western Michigan and other. And I loved Mayock because he was a draft geek, if that makes sense. And that was fantastic. And there's him, and I think it's fair to say that Lance Zierlein, I don't agree with probably 80% of what he writes, but it's very clear that he does his own work. He writes up his own reports, and he's his own man, and he's not basing his grades on what the consensus is saying. And I think Tony Pauline does that as well. Everybody else, I am not bothered about. Every mock's the same. They don't put much effort in to sort of look at team needs. They don't consider various things. They're the kind of people who watch a pro day and see someone throwing a pair of shorts and think that's indicative of their potential in the NFL. I don't enjoy it, Kenny. I don't enjoy reading it. I just think it's a load of old guff. And I hope that we do it a little bit differently at Seahawks Draft Blog, because I think if you look at my horizontal board, it's different, and I'll get and nearly most of it, I'll be wrong on this guy, and I might be right on this guy. But at least you know that I've watched the games, and I have I spend so much time watching this. My wife is gonna kill me because I watch so much of this. I can tell that she's getting to the end of it. It's been more work this year than ever before. She's getting to the end of her tether with it. But she is a legend in that regard. And I just hope that people who visited know that we kind of do things differently. It's not just a recycling of what's churning around in the media, which I think I don't read mock drafts anymore.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons. Well, that's probably one of the main reasons. I know it's one of the reasons that I've always respected, appreciated, wanted to hear your thoughts on these prospects, because I do get the sense, especially now, that it's just so easy to have an opinion. Everybody gets to have one. Everyone gets to put it out there, and what makes those opinions spread far and wide, it is not based on watching the tape. All out of the times it's about what's a salacious, what's exciting, what sounds good, what's shot. It's the same thing you see about what videos on YouTube reach the top. If it's going to be a clickbaity type of title that brings in people to get their start there, and so that's where it becomes more clear, I think, who those. I go on YouTube to try and learn more about prospects, and honestly, the channels that I often subscribe to have like less than 1,000 subscribers, but they're going through the videos, and they're saying, and I'm watching it with them. They're telling me why the tape is the way that it is, and it's clear that they're doing their own homework, and they've got, these are my favorite draft channels, more than anything that you could find on NFL Network or ESPN or whatever the big stuff is. And everyone has their own lane, I suppose, in terms of like, well, this is what we do in draft coverage, but a lot of the great ones are out there.
Can I just say something? Because this is what really irked me about the draft season so far. This is one of the main issues, Kenny, and this is a good example, I think. So Daniel Jeremiah tweeted after the Senior Bowl. This is after the Senior Bowl. Just finished studying Minnesota edge rusher Boya Mafe. The splash plays at the Senior Bowl weren't a fluke. This dude is explosive. He's a first-round talent. 3,000 likes on Twitter. So Daniel Jeremiah was the chief analyst for the NFL Network, covering every day of the Senior Bowl, and he was calling the game with two other individuals, Charles Davis and Andrew Siciliano. He didn't watch Boya Mafe before the Senior Bowl. He studied his tape after the Senior Bowl and then declared he was a first-round pick. He put out a top 50 before the Senior Bowl and didn't have Boya Mafe on the list. Like, if you said to me, Rob, we want you to go and cover the Senior Bowl for the NFL Network next year, fancy that. And I would say, right, I am going to watch every single player who is at that Senior Bowl, and I am going to have notes on every single one of them. I am going to know in my head what I think of these players before I get off the plane in Mobile. And the night before that game starts, I'm revising and reviewing. I'm doing everything I can to make sure that I know the guys that I'm watching and I can give the best analysis. How can he give the best analysis of the Senior Bowl if he's just finishing studying Boya Mafe after the event's taken place? That he's actually going there, watching the guys, saying, okay, this guy, and this guy stood out. Now I'll go and watch them. That's not, I don't want that from my draft coverage. Mayock would never have done that. I want somebody who's going to go there, who knows more than any of us do, the amateurs out there, to go and tell us why these guys are good, who should we be looking out for, what they're, everything about them, not finding stuff out while you're there and then having a go and then tweeting something out and getting 3,000 likes. By the way, I'm still waiting for Deshaun Watson to arrive in Seattle because according to Daniel Jeremiah, that was nailed on.
I mean, I love this. I mean, I'm actually going to enjoy if I see Daniel Jeremiah pop on my TV, I'm going to enjoy it more now because of you.
I'm sorry, that was a big rant, but I feel like it needed to be said. I just feel like it just came out.
It's worthy. I think it's worthy. I mean, I think people are at their wits' end with media of all kinds. And your area of expertise here is with the draft. So, and I think like that's something that I've wanted to provide with the, that was what I kind of learned while doing the Seaside Joe newsletter over the course of the time that I've done it, is just like, there's a lot of people out here that it's not just that I disagree with them, it's that I don't even think they're qualified, like you're saying, you know, and it's not even like I'm saying, it's just like, it's not that I have to be qualified. It's like, you're supposed to be qualified, you know, that's why I'm going to you. And so like, I feel that way, whether it feels good to just sort of say like, hey, here's some of the truth about all of the coverage that you guys watch. So I know why you are saying these things and feeling that way, because that's what I want. I don't want the narrative, you know, I don't want the narrative. I want the reality. Give me the reality on this stuff. And it's draft coverage is so popular that I know that you could probably go out there and find a bunch of teenagers who could go into the Senior Bowl and tell you everything about those prospects, because there's just like there's a people out there, a faction of people out there who from very early, I watch their videos, and they're very young people who can tell me so many things about these prospects. So if your job is that, if you're the number one guy for doing that, you would think, you know who these guys are, you like a Mike Mayock. So that makes perfect sense to me. You don't read mock drafts. Do you come across mock drafts, and is that are you seeing a major disconnect this year? I know we've always kind of in 3000 NFL mock draft talked about like, yeah, this guy's rated too high, this guy's rated too low, but how big is the disconnect this year?
I think it was always going to be an unpredictable year because of the lack of the obvious top 10 picks. You know, usually there's like 7 or 8 guys who you can kind of slot into the top 10, and you know the positions might change a little bit. Like someone might have a guy going 3, but someone else might have him going 5 or something like that. But generally speaking, the guys in the sort of the top are the same, and then you sort of get into the teens, and you'll see the same kind of names appearing there. And then, you know, the bottom third of the first round is always a crapshoot, really. That's where a lot of people's mock drafts, when they do the mock draft scoring, when the actual draft happens, that's where it all kind of falls apart. But this year it was different, and that you had sort of, I mean, like as I was tracking it along, you know, you would see someone like Tyler Linderbaum in the top 10, and you think, well, that's probably not going to happen. Or you would see other players get, and for me at the moment, Kenny, like I say, I'm not an avid reader of mock drafts, but people will mention so and so has put this guy here, and you know the Seahawks have been, you know, it's the quarterbacks thing. I think we're going to see a lot of this now. You know, we've had the pro days, so I think we'll probably see mock drafts where Malik Willis is in the top 10, Kenny Pickett's in the top 10, Matt Corral's in the top 10. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, can I say with regards to that? So I really like this site, NFLmockdraftdatabase.com, because I like that it keeps track. And I don't know whose mock drafts and how you qualify to keep track, but I like that it keeps track, and I like that it keeps a historical record, because to me, it doesn't tell us about the draft. It tells us about the mock drafters, right? So what mock draft does is they've got the consensus mock draft right now. This is the consensus based on the average of where these guys are going. The most popular pick, meaning the guy that gets most often picked and mocked to the team in this draft, is Evan Neal to the Jaguars. That's 45% of mock drafts are saying Evan Neal to the Jaguars. The second most popular is Aiden Hutchinson to the Lions at 38%. Now, it's possible that Aiden Hutchinson's number is actually higher for first overall, and maybe this thing is just saying, like, because it's a consensus mock draft. Number 3, the third most popular pick, 33%, Malik Willis to the Seahawks. That's a 33% of mock drafts are saying that the Seahawks will draft Malik Willis.
Yeah. I mean, look, I guess it's not a real surprise, because having written, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of mock drafts over the years myself. And, you know, the thing, what you always kind of do is when you, at least this is what I do, Kenny, is that you're always kind of generally working on a mock draft. So like I've got a MacBook, and, you know, the little notes thing, I'm always playing around with a mock draft, you know, sort of adjusting it, fiddling with it, editing it. And then eventually there will come a day when I'll do a mock draft. I'll publish a mock draft. And the sort of the process of coming to that mock draft has been basically days of tinkering, or if I've got like 10 minutes and I'm like waiting in line for something, I might mess around with a mock draft. So you spend a lot of time doing these things. If you are somebody who just sort of sits down and goes, right, I'm doing a mock draft, I'm going to sit down and do a mock draft, you are going to look for your easy wins. You're going to look for teams where you think, okay, I can fit that player in there and I can move on to the next pick, because there'll probably be about 5 or 6 picks in the 32 picks that you really sort of dwell on and wonder, oh, I'm not sure about that. I can't place what they're going to do. They don't have many needs. Or I would love to put that player there, but I can't fit them in because I've got them going there. So when you see a team like the Seahawks, you think, they traded Russell Wilson. Malik Willis had a good pro day. He's had a good combine. We'll put Malik Willis there and move on. It's on to the next one. Right, what are New York going to do at number 10? I think that's how a lot of mock drafts are put together. I think if you sat down with most people, and look, there'll be some Seahawks fans who are convinced that Seahawks are going to take Malik Willis. I mean, I saw it yesterday on Twitter. It was awash with Seahawks fans pining for Malik Willis because of that one throw he did, where he's throwing off balance and throwing it downfield 60 yards. And everyone's thinking, well, that means he must be drafted by the Seahawks. But a lot of people will want that. But I think if you actually sat down with these people and said, look, I think this is where the Seahawks are. I think they are going to try and build a foundation this year. Mm-hmm. I think that they are going to probably maybe draft a quarterback later on, throw them into a competition, maybe treat this as a bit of a 2011. You just can't help but look forward at the 2023 quarterbacks and think there's real possibility there if you're just patient for 1 year, and that they won't take a Willis. Now, look, you could also make an argument for saying John Schneider loves traits and Malik Willis has traits, but then there are so many things that are wrong with Malik Willis's game right now that I think taking him, sitting him on a bad roster for a year, not having that 9 pick to improve other areas, and then in a year's time, sort of say, right, now we're going to build up everything around Malik Willis. I'm not sure that's what they're going to do. They might do. I wouldn't rule it out completely. I don't know. I've watched his tape, mm-hmm. and I have a hard time thinking that Pete Carroll is going to say, that's the guy. That's the guy that's going to get me back to a Super Bowl. That player who's just rejected that wide open, easy throw down the middle because there's a minute bit of pressure and has scrambled out of the pocket and rejected it and tried to play hero ball on the run. That's who I'm going to go with. The player who took 51 sacks in 2021 alone because he constantly bails on the pocket under any sign of pressure, who has got technique issues through the roof, never squares his shoulders. He telegraphs a lot, he pats the ball a lot when he's about to throw. I think he could be, he had, I think, about 15 interceptions last year.
Is there a chance that no quarterbacks go in the first round?
I think there's a chance of that, yeah. And I had a chat with Scott McLuhan last week, and he said that 3 will go in the first round, and none of them are first round prospects. He said all 3 of them will be round 3 grades.
Wow.
But they'll go in the first round. And he felt that was Willis and Pickett and Corral that will go in the first round. And he didn't think any of them. I don't know I can't remember what he said about Pickett, but he said that Corral and Willis couldn't start, in year one. They'd have to sit. Yeah. So what do you want to do? I mean, like, this is when you're talking about sitting a player for a whole year, which is rarer these days. I know that Mahomes had that, and 1 or 2 other rookies, like Trey Lance, has just had that, but it's about the situation, isn't it? Can Pittsburgh, let's say Pittsburgh draft Willis at 20, and then Mitch Trubisky plays badly in the first 2 weeks.
Which is like guarantee. If you draft, it's like that's a guarantee, just like it was with Justin Fields and Andy Dalton.
Exactly. That's the example. That's the example. It's because they don't want Andy Dalton. But in San Francisco, it was the same as well, because Garoppolo was hurt, he wasn't playing well. And they stuck with him, and it was pressure was growing, and all of a sudden Kyle Shanahan's no good, and all of this, and that's what was happening in San Francisco. And then they just sort of clicked, and everything worked, and everyone kind of forgot about all of that. But it was there in San Francisco as well, so it's hard. And look, I think there are teams, obviously, you could look at who might go for a quarterback, but many of them have brought people in. So New Orleans have paid quite a lot of money for Jameis Winston to come back. Are they then going to take Kenny Pickett, or are they going to take a left tackle because they've just lost the left tackle? Will the Steelers go in that direction, or do they feel with Trubisky they've bought themselves a year to maybe look at next year's class? I don't know. What are Carolina going to do? They've only got 1 pick in the first 3 rounds. Do they really want to reach at a quarterback at number 6? Does the GM think, this coach, it's nothing to do with me. If they have a bad year, he's on the way out, and I'm picking next year with a new coach that I've picked.
Right.
I'll just pick who I want. Matt Rule, see you later in a year's time, and I'll go and get my coaching. He might be thinking that. I think they'll take an offensive lineman if there's one there. So there is a chance that none will go in the first round. I think if you get to sort of the 20s, there'll probably be teams looking to move up because the fifth-year option's useful for a quarterback. And maybe Seattle would be one of those teams thinking about that. I mean, we've all seen that picture of Carroll having a very cozy meeting with the Kiffins and Matt Corral, haven't we? So, and they've drafted from the Kiffin teams in the past with Alex McGough. Well, that was a 7th round pick, but so I think there's a chance that some will go in round 1. But I don't want the Seahawks to do it. I want them to draft Jack Coan instead.
I think okay, Jack Coan from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I think, which by the way, I got to get it before I forget, because you said you're at Will Levi's. I have to get it out there for all the Seaside Joe readers from the beginning. Grayson McCALLLLL, that's my guy. I love Grayson McCALLLLL. I mean, he's a project. You got to build your offense around him. But this is my favorite player in college football because, I mean, he is successful. There's no doubt that he's the most successful quarterback at the last 2 years, just in terms of, I mean, he's just done a great job. I know that he's got some issues there, but big fan of Grayson McCALLLL. Can
I throw another name as well?
Please.
Dorian Robinson-Thompson at UCLA, I think, has got something about him. I mean, he may not be a first round pick, but there's something there.
I like that line from what I remember, because from last season, I was watching the quarterbacks each week, not like, but I would go through it's so great, by the way. If there is stuff that has gone well for the draft coverage and college football coverage, is that you can now just go to YouTube and watch a guy's plays in an entire game, and that's it.
Because it used to be like Draft Breakdown and do like, if people remember that website, and they would do like videos of players. I remember watching like Eric Berry videos in 2010 during that season. And then that stopped. And then for like about a year, there was no YouTube videos. And now they say you can watch whole games. There's loads of people breaking these things down. It's never been easier to watch. Watch tape.
It's insane. And it's fun, to get that opportunity and to have your favorites, right? So it's like everybody knows that my long shot pick is McCALLLL, and we'll see what happens. But I did want to I forget what I was going to say, but I was going to talk about the first pick with regards to what are the picks then, other than like Malik Willis. Let's say this for the offensive lineman, which is the worst case scenario you think with the number 9 pick for the Seahawks? What would be the one that goes like, no, that doesn't make, people are saying that doesn't make any sense. He's not a fit for what Pete Carroll does.
The worst pick would be another safety. It would be that if they do that, then I think a few people will have had enough.
By the way, Kyle Hamilton, another guy who I hear is like maybe a Mark Barron or something like that. Maybe he's not going to be that great of a player, but he'll be useful.
Yeah, I think that's a decent. I think he's probably slightly different, but I think that kind of position for him, that. I guess they call it a death backer or something. It's probably the best role for him. But running 4.69 on a fast track is alarm bells. The worst case, look, the pick that will make me most underwhelmed will be Charles Cross, because I don't believe it. I don't think he is a Pete Carroll, John Schneider offensive lineman. He's not explosive. He didn't test well in the agility. He just ran a reasonable 40. He's not long. He's got 34-inch arms. He's not uniquely long and big. He's about 305 pounds and 6'4". I would be massively underwhelmed by that. I don't think, and he gets mocked to the Seahawks a lot. A lot. You see a lot of people projecting him. I accidentally watched a Pete Prisco mock draft on YouTube yesterday, and he gave the Seahawks Charles Cross, and I turned it off straight away afterwards. So, but I was going to do that anyway because it was Prisco's mock. But then that really is the one that would underwhelm me. But I mean, the ones, on the offs, because I think, also I want to be positive about this. The ones that would really excite me are Jermaine Johnson, Kayvon Thibodeau, Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner, Travon Walker, I'll throw in Jordan Davis because I do think he's an exciting player, even if he's not the divisor. Devontae Wyatt, I'd happily take at 9 because I think he could be Geno Atkins. I think that's everybody sort of.
No
in that sort of,
offensive lineman.
I mean, look, if they drafted Trevor Penning at 9, I'd kind of go, okay, fine. I wouldn't have a problem with it. I'd be like, I can see why they've done it, and all the best to him. I hope he has. I hope he has a great career.
That seems like you're not going to jump up and down, but it's like if you can just get into 2023 knowing that you've solidified one position, that's great.
Yeah, it's a kind of a bit of a shrug for me. It's kind of like, fine. If he becomes a cornerstone left tackle, then it's a complete justification in the pick. But I kind of when you're picking a left tackle in the top 10. I kind of want them to know that they're going to be Tyrone Smith. I want to watch that and go, I have no doubts whatsoever. This guy is legit. Left tackle, brilliant player.
Is that guy in the draft next year?
Let me have a look at my list. The only tackle that I've got listed in that kind of, I don't see what Zion Nelson at Miami potentially is an offensive lineman who could develop into that. I don't see a star. I haven't got a star left tackle on that. I mean, I haven't studied everybody. Yeah. So I don't know that. I might just have missed one, but I don't really see one, to be honest, Kenny. But
how about Jackson Kirkland? Does he have high end potential after he's returned?
No, I'm afraid not. I mean, I think he would have been a late round pick if that.
Oh, okay.
If he'd have gone into this draft, I don't know what this situation is now. I don't know if they let him go back to Washington in the end or not. I know he was trying to get back in, wasn't he? Because of the situation with his injury. I didn't really see whether there was a conclusion to that yet or not. But I suspect that they will let him back and do that. I don't see why. It would be given that they're just letting anybody in college football do what they want now. Yeah, you can move teams, you can move teams, you can move teams. Especially cruel not to let him come back.
I was just watching one of these videos, and I mean, not just a video. I mean, it's just news where the Tennessee quarterback, basically, it's like the recruit got like $8 million in an NIL deal. I mean, this is so, not that it's wrong, it's just so insane.
Yeah, and listen, exactly. I mean, you can't. I don't begrudge players for getting paid for playing football, totally. But I must admit, I don't enjoy college football's ability, the freedom of movement that is now exists. That players, there are so many players just switching teams, players entering transfer portals. That there is a chance that you could be buried on a depth chart for 3 years, and then in your final year you have a great senior year and you do go in round 1. We see it all the time. Players are late bloomers, and what happens now is if you don't start in like year 1 or year 2, you apply to be in the transfer portal. And I think I heard somewhere that there's like there are loads of players like in the transfer portal. I mean, I want to say there's like hundreds almost, just sort of that never go anywhere, Kenny. They never even get another team because they think, oh well, I'll just leave and go somewhere else, and nobody wants them. So you're better off just staying there and trying to make it work. And what are we teaching players is that if the going gets tough, if you don't win a job, give up and go somewhere else. There's got to be that sort of, no, I want to stick it out and play. And I'm a little bit fearful for the future as well, because I also worry a little bit that we're getting into a situation now where, especially with other teams moving into the SEC, where we're going to have the SEC and everyone else. And it was so positive to see Lincoln Riley go to USC, because it was just, he's moving away from a team that's going to end up in the SEC to go and try and make USC great. And he's had Oklahoma on the brink of the playoffs every single year, or in the playoffs every year, or on the brink. And if he could go and make USC a destination team and a playoff contender, and maybe even a national champion, he might save college football.
That's a really fascinating take. I hadn't thought of it that way. I definitely had thought about whether or not certain sports was doomed in a certain way. Do you think that the 3-year rule will be doomed?
I hope not. I really hope not, because I think that having a whole bunch of one and done, I mean, like college basketball, I have no interest in it whatsoever. And this whole, and I was listening to a conversation about it the other day, the whole one and done approach, you know, and in fact, I think it was Colin Coward who was talking about why he was talking about why he doesn't talk about college football on his show. And he said, because I don't know any, you never get a chance to sort of get to know any of these players on the team. You never kind of know who a starting five is. You know, you everything changes year to year to year.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. You know, I don't want to watch Alabama win a national championship with a whole bunch of guys and then like 7 freshmen leave the team to go and play in the NFL. I don't want that. It's hard because you don't want to stop players. You know, I don't want to make these players like prevent them from earning a living, you know, for 3 years, but then they're allowing money into college football now. So they are earning money for their craft, for their skills, for their talent. So you're giving them that. But I don't want it to turn into college basketball. And if it does, you know, I think along with the stupid taunting rule and a lot of other stupid things the NFL's doing, Kenny, I think I'll start losing a bit of a passion for the sport. You know, there's lots of little stupid things that annoy me about the NFL, like that taunting rule that they introduced last year. And if they go down that road with college football and it's one and done, you'll just I'll end up maybe becoming more of just a passing a Seahawks fan first and foremost, who follows the Seahawks and doesn't invest as much time in the draft and college football. I could see myself going down that route.
It's a really I don't know what the term is, but it's a tumultuous time. It's at a crossroads because I think about the ways in which how human beings are impacted by money. Now we're only talking about like the cream of the crop maybe, and when we're talking about 7 figures, but still, I mean, Quinn Ewers has made more money before playing college football than I'll ever make in my life, and that's fine. You know, use what you have gotten, because there's a good chance Quinn Ewers will never make it to the NFL, or at least never be like, you know, there's a good chance a lot of these guys won't have the money at a certain point. So go out there, do your thing. But, you know, when you talk about one and done, I mean, that's basically what Alabama, I think, is doing to a certain degree, where they lose wide receivers to the first round in the draft in 2020. So then they bring in Jameson Williams, or and Jameson Williams is the best receiver. So then he leaves. So what do? They got the top transfer portal wide receiver this year, Garrett something or whatever his name is. No offense. I mean, sure. And they're talked about him being a top pick next year. Plus I'd seen a video where it was like, they got the top cornerback in the transfer portal. They got, and if you want to be a guy like Spencer Rattler, if you want to be the quarterback who followed Lincoln Riley to USC and start next year, and then, I think he's not eligible the year after the next year, but then Cade, whatever. But it's just like, you go there for 1 year, like a Russell Wilson, helped them win. But I was like, Russell Wilson was a precursor. You go somewhere for 1 year if you don't have to transfer. To think about it, Russell Wilson really may have set a certain standard here just by his weird eligibility, where he could go straight from NC State to Wisconsin and almost win a championship, or at least take them to the very brink of it. And it's like, these things are shifting so quickly. And I wonder, on the other hand, if certain guys who would have flamed out in the NFL, because who knows what happens when you get your rookie contract, you start making a lot of money, you're popular, you're famous, you lose focus. Some of these guys are going to lose focus in college from all of these insane distractions, moving around the country, having loads of cash. And other guys are going to probably flourish, just like the young guys in the NFL still flourish. Just because they're getting money, it doesn't change them. But I wonder if it'll sort of like change that mental makeup.
Yeah, I think the game is changing and evolving, and I think coaching's being severely impacted. So there's a number of coaches actually, in big jobs, who just walked away from the sport in college football this year. They just said, I need to spend more time with my family. These are coaches who maybe, did a good job. I'm trying to think, was it Fuentes at Virginia Tech or somebody? I think he maybe got fired, but there was another coach at Virginia. I think it wasn't Bronco. What's his name? Was it? I don't know. Anyway, forget the name. But he quit because he just said, I don't see my family enough. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to get a job. You're going to work your way up through the coaching ranks. You're going to get a job at a team like Memphis. You get promoted. You get a big payday to go and coach, at Virginia Tech or North Carolina, somebody like that. And then maybe after 2 or 3 years, Kenny, you're just going to jack it in because you'll have made your millions and you'll think, the quality of life's terrible. In order to win recruiting battles, I have to go on travel across states or country, the whole country, to go and battle other coaches. And it's all about, I have to go into living rooms and I have to try and convince these people. And if I'm not prepared to do that, my team will not recruit well and I will get fired. So rather than sort of go into that battle every single year and never have a minute's peace, I'm just going to give up. And I think the Nick Sabans who just do this forever and live for this, and Pete Carroll's like that as well, are going to be few and far between. And we're starting to see it in the NFL. Sean Payton's walked away. Sean Payton's not an old man. He's been around a long time, but he's not an old man. And he's just gone, I'm done. I may never come back, but I'm done. I'll go and broadcast instead. There was all the talk about Sean McVay doing that. Sean McVay will not be an NFL head coach in 5 years' time. He'll be broadcasting on some TV broadcast at Amazon, whatever it is, or Twitter or Google, or whoever owns the rights by then. And he'll be earning an absolute fortune to go and do that. And other coaches will be the same. I'm surprised if Shanahan walks away and others. Maybe Shanahan will stick around because it's just his family business, isn't it? But do you see what I mean? Like, coaches are just going to move away from this. And I think it is going to impact the game. We're going to have a lot more churn with coaches. I think there's going to be a lot more short-termism in the NFL. Coaches generally got a longer than over here in English soccer and football. The average lifespan of a coach is about 6 months. You basically you come in, and if you don't turn it around, you're out, you're fired. And you'll be fired in season and somebody else comes in. Some teams have 3 coaches in a year, because there's a constant success. And I think we'll see that in the NFL. And then the other thing that I think is it sits really uncomfortably with me. I don't know if you've followed this at all, the Arch Manning situation. Have you seen this?
I only know of Arch Manning. I don't know of a situation. Okay,
the situation, I would call it a situation. He takes visits to teams during the season, and then he'll go to Ole Miss or he'll go to Georgia and stuff like that. The TV this is a child essentially, will put him on the TV and they will spend the whole game talking about him. And let's say he's at the Georgia game and Georgia scored a touchdown. Hey, I wonder what Arch Manning thought of that. And it's that all the way through it is about Arch Manning, and the attention on this child, the pressure that he must, good luck to him if he can handle all of that. He's a Manning. Maybe that's just life for the Mannings. I don't know. Maybe they're wired a little bit differently. I kind of get the sense that maybe they are. But how he's going to handle the attention that's coming his way when he gets into college, I don't know. And then you have this ridiculous thing, like the kid's playing high school basketball and he's got Kirby Smart and Nick Saban watching him on the sidelines. Let the lad just play his game of basketball. Let him enjoy his life without thinking Nick Saban's over there, and I better put on a good performance in this sport that I'm not going to be playing in college. I feel quite uncomfortable about that, frankly. I think there's too much attention on this child.
When you say that too, I just made me think a couple of years ago. I remember looking and seeing who's the next big quarterback coming up, blah, blah, blah. And going and seeing, Spencer Rattler. Okay, great name. He's got all he's got all the sort of like the modern day intangibles and athleticism that you were talking about with Patrick Mahomes. It's like, this guy. I look at his Instagram, 1 million followers. He's in high school. And I'm going, what is this going to do? And look, I can't connect one to the other, but Spencer Rattler is not really going to the NFL right now. And he seemed to be on that path and to be transferred already, to be in Lincoln Riley's system and to not explode at where he was at, to get benched for a true freshman. What impact does that social attention, does that need? Because I also think about to what degree does all of the brand deals and everything impact, a Russell Wilson or anybody out there in the NFL. I was writing about Aaron Donald when this year after the Super Bowl, all this talk, will Aaron Donald retire? And I wrote an article about it, and I really broke it down that he almost has more reasons not to play football than to play football at this point. He might be leaving money on the table by playing his contract. He's not like the most personable, famous guy, but there's certain guys out there in the NFL where you're thinking look, Pat McAfee is making $30 million a year doing a podcast. Tony Romo is getting $30 million. Tony Romo's contract with CBS is bigger than all the money he made with the Dallas Cowboys. It was a different era, but at the end of the day, like, because of branding and media, you never know what's around the corner. So for me, I was like, well, Aaron Donald, he can either be the hardest working guy in the NFL, which is going to take up his entire life, and be away from his family, and he doesn't really need money, or he can maybe be chilling. And if Sean McVay, like you're saying, Sean McVay is a perfect example of a guy who can get a $40 million, $50 million a year contract doing broadcasting. It's like, if that's the guy that they think is going to fix Monday Night Football, which I know Monday Night Football just made their bet on someone else and that team over there with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. But it's like, you never know when CBS wants to beat them, they'll go out for Sean McVay, money that we have never fathomed before, just because, that's how much can go in there. So the motivation really seems to be perhaps at question if we're going down this path, and NIL deals and stuff like that is really making it interesting, and how the transfer portal and how this stuff impacts guys based on where they choose to go in the NFL. I think Tyreek Hill chose Florida over New York for a number of reasons, including like marketing, taxes, things that can go into the bottom line of your bank account, right?
Well, I think social media plays into this as well. I know over here, after a game, athletes just go straight on the phones. What are people saying about me? Mm-hmm. What is happening here? And the problem with sort of that the NFL is because it's plays. So like in soccer, if someone makes a mistake, yeah, it gets shown up on that. But because it's a specific play, who blew this coverage, who dropped this pass, which quarterback made this bad read, and then you've got people like, well, me, I suppose, going, well, this was wrong with this, and then it gets shown up in front of a very public, international audience. That must be very. I mean, I wouldn't be on Twitter if I was an athlete. And look, you just look. I mean, I was looking at this now, Kenny. The ESPN's top 300 recruits from the year that Kayvon Thibodeau was the #1 overall recruit. The top 2 quarterbacks in that class were Graham Mertz, who is at Wisconsin, who was thrown in right at the deep end, big pressure, big attention. Graham Mertz, the savior, big deal. They've got him. He's going to be the quarterback there, for the future. It hasn't worked for him. And Bo Nix at Auburn, who was exactly the same. He's the next big thing, putting a lot of attention, high profile, and it hasn't worked for either of those two. And there's a lot of pressure on these guys in college, and it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult, and I don't think the game's going to benefit from it down the line. But I think sort of once the toothpaste comes out, it's hard to get it back in the tube with the money, with the attention, with the social media, with the broadcasts. I don't think there's any going back from this now. But I think we've spoiled our culture in a lot of ways, and this is a good example of it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, the toothpaste out of the tube, the train is out of the station. Like, it's hard to say what the impact will be, and if it will be devastating for a lot of things, including sports, including football and the NFL. But certainly right now, what the NFL is concerned about is more money is coming in than ever before. And we'll see what that impacts. Let's get in a few more Seahawks draft related questions here before we go. How big of a need is the linebacker position here? Bobby Wagner out. Unfortunately, Jordyn Brooks, what was your evaluation on his second year? And with all this talk about playing even more of a 3-4 and employing, more, what are the big needs here? What are the likelihood of the Seahawks filling that position next to Jordyn Brooks? I thought Jordyn Brooks was okay. I don't think there's anything special. I know that people have been saying, Kenny, that because he set a record for, tackles, and I think that was more to do with the fact that the Seahawks were so easy to play against on defense that they basically collected tackles because the defense was terrible. So I don't read too much into that particular statistic, but he's fine and could do a lot worse than him. I think what's interesting here is was talking to Jim Levitt today, was his sort of approach for the linebackers, and he was sort of saying that he had a couple of really good ones in San Francisco. He was the linebackers coach for Vic Fangio. So I suppose on the one hand you would say, well, from a Fangio defense, if you've got those kind of guys, then yeah, you know, they had Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman, I think. So they were exceptional players, and that shows the importance of them in that scheme. You know, Chicago took Roquan Smith to play linebacker, but then Sean Desai, when he was the defensive coordinator in Chicago, he would play an extra safety rather than a linebacker, you know, in a lot more snaps than Fangio and Chuck Pagano did when they were the defensive coordinators. So I wonder, I mean, I have been sort of assuming that the Seahawks are going to take a linebacker at 40 or 41. Part of me does wonder a little bit whether they'll just roll with Cody Barton there, then take him off the field and put another safety on the field, whether that's Marquise Blair, Ryan Neal, or they obviously really like Ryan Neal. And if they are going to do a lot more of that, could that mean that they just go with Barton and Bemba Curvin and this guy they brought in from Chicago today, and maybe sort of just take a linebacker later on, you know, day 3 and go with that, or what? But for me, Kenny, it's such a good linebacker draft. With, you know, it's not that, you know, I think that some of these guys are going to be decent. I think Channing Tindall could be fantastic. Quay Walker could be amazing. Leo Chanel could be really, really good. So I think that getting one of those guys, and Tindall's the one for me. I think he just plays so aggressive, so quick, so violent. I think that's exactly what you want. Flies to the ball. In year 1, even if he's not starting straight away like Brooks didn't, he's going to be amazing on special teams. I'd love to see Channing Tindall come to the Seahawks, but he might not be there at 40. He might go off in the 30s. And if he isn't, and if you don't fancy Leo Chanel, and if you don't fancy Quay Walker might go in the end of the first round, then maybe you don't take a linebacker 40, 41. Maybe you do take one later. So I think there's some options there, but I'd love to see Tindall or Chanel in particular, or Quay Walker for the Seahawks, just because I think they're really good players and they need some good players.
Let me pull one more, another comment here from the Seaside Joe newsletter comments section. A lot of these are similar to one another. One of them is, you know, mentioning something that I wrote up this morning. It says, loved the write-up on Jameson Williams after seeing the contracts of Devontae and Tyreek. I don't mind grabbing another top flight receiver, you know, and also mentioning, I think, like, the contract figures, you know, you can save. We always talk about how quarterback contracts save you money, but a great, obviously, if you have a great Tyreek Hill on a rookie contract, that's just the same. It's not, you know, that's also savings. You know, a dollar is a dollar. So that's probably making people think a little bit more about what the Seahawks and any fans of any team almost would like a receiver. And no fan is going to, you know, turn down a really exciting receiver, I think, added to that roster. I personally, I mean, I again, like, I don't know anything, and then I get very excited, and then I go out and I promote it because I like just get very excited watching a player. And I think that's the way that I felt watching Jameson Williams and thinking about, like, well, hey, the Seahawks, you know, they have Shane Waldron. That's kind of like the Rams. The Rams have always had 3-star receivers with Sean McVay. It's always been a point of emphasis. And last year we saw the Bengals make the Super Bowl with 3 starting potential number 1 receivers, including a great one, if not 2. We saw that the Rams had the number 1 wide receiver in the entire NFL, Offensive Player of the Year, Cooper Kupp. Plus they went out and got Odell Beckham Jr. Plus they always add more and more receivers. We saw the Bucs the year before with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown. So it's not that out of line to think that the Seahawks here, even if you lock down DK Metcalf, could have a very serious need here at receiver in the next 2 to 3 years. What are your thoughts on A, Jameson Williams, and B, if the Seahawks pick a wide receiver in the first 3 picks of theirs?
Yeah, I think it's true what the modern day saying is, Kenny, that you're only really as good as your third receiver in this modern day NFL with the way that teams are playing now. I agree with that, and I think the Seahawks agree with that. That's why they took a receiver in round 2 last year, even though they had Lockett and Metcalf. They took D. Eskridge because they wanted to get another dynamic weapon on the field and thought that was really important. So it speaks to the importance of it. Hopefully D. Eskridge can take a step forward. I mean, Darrell Taylor missed almost his entire rookie season and then came back and was pretty good. So hopefully Eskridge can do the same thing. I thought Eskridge was fantastic for Western Michigan. It was a real shame that he got that concussion in week 1 because even against the Colts, he looked sharp. So hopefully he comes back. You know, do they take one in the first 3? I mean, obviously if they trade DK Metcalf, then it becomes increasingly likely, doesn't it? I mean, I think there's a determination to keep Metcalf there. I think it's one of the more interesting topics for Seahawks fans to contemplate at the moment, because I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to it. I mean, I personally would like to see them keep Metcalf. They've got a lot of cap space. I think getting rid of a 24-year-old, really good young player who seems to want to be here would be a silly thing to do. Rebuilding or not, why not keep him? So that'd be my sort of view on it. And you'd only have to replace him if he left. But at the same time, do you want to spend $25 million a year on DK Metcalf? I mean, like, if you'd have said 2 years ago he might cost $22 to $25 million a year, you'd spit your coffee out. I mean, you'd be like, what? I don't believe that. What are you talking about? I mean, like, you'd be thinking 15 million, 18 million at tops, that kind of range. Mm-hmm. And now we're talking, quarterback salary for DK Metcalf. And the Seahawks are going to have to make a big choice here. Do they want to pay him? Do they want to pay him as much as, you've just sort of, relinquished a massive quarterback contract to free up some cap space. And Carroll and Schneider are sat there talking about how great it is to have a bit of flexibility with the cap and stuff like that. I know that it's not $35 million like Russell Wilson, but it's a still chunk of cash, isn't it, on a receiver? And then you'd be paying what, $30 million average salary for two safeties, and what's the combined salaries of Lockett and Metcalf if you pay him that much? That's a lot of money to have invested in those two positions when you'd probably rather have it invested in maybe the trenches, let's say, or cornerback moving forward. So they've got a big call to make. In terms of receiver, I was talking to someone recently who knows a lot more than me, and they said that there could be 30 receivers in this draft who have got year one impact potential.
Wow. So
that's how deep this draft is. I mean, with the first three picks, they're not going to take one at 9.
Right.
40-41, I think, is probably only likely if Metcalf goes, and then you could have a couple of extra picks before 40 and 41 anyway. But I think some names. Jameson Williams is a fantastic player who would go in the top 15 if he wasn't injured, in my opinion. I could see him going to the Chiefs at the end of round 1 because of this injury, and then just being even better than Tyreek Hill, frankly.
Yeah. By the way, he looks good on tape. He did all the stuff at Alabama that you want from a player, and he's also just got this great personality and character, and you feel like he's got football intelligence, and he's a great teammate, and not a drag at all. And the other thing too with keeping a guy like DK Metcalf and adding in really nice personable guys, it's recruiting free agents is clearly such a big deal now. You got to have people that are attractive if you want to rebuild in 2023 and 2024, right?
Jameson Williams' acceleration reminds me of Deshaun Jackson. I mean, he's bigger than Jackson, but watch him accelerate, and run away from people. He's just got a suddenness to him, which is, it's what you want. It's what you want in a modern day receiver. So, yeah, and I think you're right with the personality and the recruiting aspect of it, and that's going to be big for the Seahawks because they can't seem to convince people to come to Seattle. So
yeah. Because football players are football fans. They think of these guys as stars. I saw it here in LA with the Rams, how big of a deal it was for Odell Beckham Jr. to get calls from Von Miller and being told hey, come join me. We're just going to do something crazy over here. That's a huge deal because they're fans of these guys.
Yeah. I think it's a big deal. And look, to name a few other guys that could be that. I mean, in round 2, I think Kevin Austin Jr. at Notre Dame is incredibly underrated. I think he's a fantastic player who will go in round 2. Not many people have got him in round 2, but I think he will. Christian Watson at North Dakota State is incredibly gritty, competitive, quick. Alec Pierce at Cincinnati, he's got amazing physical profile, but nearly every catch that he made last year was a contended catch. And you kind of think, well, you run a 4.3. Is there any chance of a bit of separation here? And does that speed translate onto the field? I'm not sure it does, but he does high point very, very well. You've got Drake London, Wan'Dale Robinson, who I think's got the same kind of, thick build that Golden Tate had. A lot of people compare Calvin Austin at Memphis to Golden Tate. I think actually Wan'Dale Robinson's more like Golden Tate. And I think Calvin Austin's more of that dynamic, smaller, quicker. I think he's more like Tyler Lockett, actually. Calvin Austin than Golden Tate. Jahan Dotson's, I think he's good. I don't think he's great. I think he's good. You've got Jalen Tolbert, looks very smooth. Jalen Tolbert maybe had the best catch by a receiver last season that I saw for South Alabama. Unbelievable catch. Go and dig that out in the highlights. A lot of people like Sky Moore. Isaiah Weston's flying under the radar. Treylon Burks has probably fallen a bit because of the way he's worked out. I like Kyle Phillips. I like Bo Melton.
There is that
Ty
risk,
Freifogel.
certainly, right? Like as you go down the list, you always have that risk. Because I was looking at it too, because I was looking at it recently too, where you go, hey, look, who did you come out of 2020? Everybody was excited about after that first year. Justin Jefferson was the star of the draft. Last year, Jamar Chase is the star of that draft. And you go, wow, what if we pass up the star of the draft for Laviska Shenault?
Yeah, that's true. But then you drafted Mike Williams instead of whoever, or the other guy who was from Western Michigan, who went to Tennessee and is now with Davis, is it?
Corey
Davis. So it's hard, you have to kind of make a judgment call on this. And I don't think that I think Olave and Garrett Wilson are good players. I don't think they'll bust. I don't know if they'll be, getting $25 million a year contracts, in a couple of years' time. But I think that they're good players. I think teams who need a receiver will have a good look at them. But I just think there's players like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown who went in round 2 who have become fantastic. Devontae Adams was a round 2 pick. Tyreek Hill was a 4th round pick. You can find receivers later on as well. And, Jamar Chase from that 1 year at LSU when they won the national championship, you just knew that guy was going to be a legend. You just knew there was just something special. And you could see it with Burrow. You could see it with Chase. And it's not a surprise. I don't think there's any quite like that in this draft, but there are guys that you could take a shot on. And look, to answer your question about the Seahawks, I don't think they'll do it in the first 2 rounds unless DK goes. Could I see them? They've often taken a receiver in round 4, haven't they? Could I see them having an eye on somebody?
Yeah, Tyler Lockett, 3rd round pick.
Yeah. Could there be somebody a bit later on that they go for here? I think the answer there's definitely a chance of that. Yeah.
No, you make a great point, which is I think something that I need to remind myself of before the draft, and a lot of people could be reminded of, which is sometimes you think you got these draft crushes and you think about, like, your mind will run wild with the most optimistic best case scenario. And you think like Jameson Williams, or you think Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson or whatever, and you put out the best minds. And that's what people did with, say Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy, who weren't the best receivers in that class. So it's like, the best receivers, I have to give it up and say, like, okay, maybe it's not Jameson Williams. He could be, but maybe the best receiver in this class ends up being who's the guy from Notre Dame?
Kevin Austin Jr.
Kevin Austin Jr. See, I probably kept on confusing him for the other Austin. So
yeah. Well, it's not this. I think look, it is the thing to sort of make clear here is, if there is anybody who is down in the dumps about Russell Wilson, I think it's an excellent draft, especially in rounds 2, 3, and 4, where the Seahawks have got 2, 3, 4 picks. Could even get more if they trade down at various spots. To sort of just to give you a general, very quick overview, Kenny, of how I'm sort of viewing this. I think the best thing to do at quarterback is as I've said, Jack Coan in day 3. I don't think he's that far behind the Corrals, the Pickett's, the Willises, the Ridders. I think he throws a good ball. I love his base. I think that there have been some accuracy issues. Some of his turnovers he throws just behind that, prevent me from going, take him in round 2. But there was just things, and he's a tilt the field player. I gave this example on another podcast that I did recently, where they've got a very good young quarterback at Notre Dame. They wanted to give him some snaps, Kenny, and they got a lead on the road in Virginia Tech, and they pulled Jack Coan out and they put the young guy in to give him a bit of game experience. He threw a pick 6, and then he threw an interception, this young quarterback. And all of a sudden, from leading the game against Virginia Tech and being in complete control, Notre Dame were losing by 8 points in the 4th quarter. And they said to Jack Coan, right, Jack, you've got 4 minutes to try and turn this around now. So they put him back on the field. They reintroduced him to the game. He immediately led a touchdown drive with 4 minutes to go, then got the 2-point conversion throwing to tie the game. The defense got a stop. He got the ball back, led a field goal drive. They won the game by the field goal. So that to me is somebody that he's got some balls. Yeah. And I think the talent, you see him going through progressions. You see him throwing downfield with good arm strength. I just think if you're going to take a shot on anybody in this draft, don't do it in round 1. wait till round 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever Jack Coan's going to be there. And just give him a chance. Just give him a chance to throw. That's on that. Running backs loaded. You don't need to take one early. I think a lot of people will like Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, and I get it. And if you're shooting for Jonathan Taylor, Jonathan Taylor, then those two have got a chance of giving you Jonathan Taylor. But the Zamir Whites, the Damian Pierces, the Tyrion Davis-Price, Brian Robinson, Snoop Connor, Isaiah Pacheco, Max Borghi, Lolo, going on and on and on. You've got so many names, you don't have to take one. And I think the Seahawks do need to add one, but they could probably wait on that position. Receiver, we've talked about. Tight ends loaded. Not loaded on the offensive tackle position, Kenny. That's why I think they've got to do something now. But guard, there is going to be great depth on day 3 to go and add some guard depth, which they might need to do as well.
It sounds like you're on the right money there with thinking in line with Pete Carroll, and that's the reason why the only big name free agent that we've heard them talking to is a tackle.
Yes, and I think it's indicative. And I think they really feel like they need a tackle. And I think they'd love to get Dwayne Brown back and fill that hole. And I think they might be talking to Eric Fisher. But I think the problem they've got is they've run out of cap space. And now they're trying to get people to come to them on deals that they're not happy with. And maybe Dwayne Brown will just go, you either pay me or I'm going to retire. And he might well say, and Eric Fisher might say that. These are people that have earned, Eric Fisher's got a ring. Dwayne Brown hasn't, but he might think, well, don't take the piss out of me. You either pay me properly or I'm not playing. So that's the problem with older players that have got, made the fortune, that they don't feel like they need to do it unless they're going to be properly compensated, or they might wait till August and not have to go through OTAs or camp or whatever to make a decision. Edge is top heavy for me, but I think you've got about 9 edge rushers who could go in the first round. That's possible. You could have 9, but then there's a bit of a gap. And then you've got a few others, where I think you've got probably 9 to 15 that are going the first 2 rounds. Then you can have a big bit of a drop off there. I think with linebacker, we talked about really good value. Cornerback is loaded. There is so much depth at cornerback. But I think if it is true, if Jim Levitt's what he said is true, is cornerback's really important, Kenny. From a Seahawks point of view, you might need that lockdown corner who travels, who follows. Sean Desai asked Jalen Johnson to go and cover, I think it was Mike Evans and Devontae Adams and somebody else who I've forgotten last year, because they wanted to take those. It was Odell Beckham, because he wanted to take those receivers away. And if Desai thinks you've got to do that, then Derek Stingley, I would say, is a very good option at number 9. And
what's his biggest drawback, Derek Stingley?
The fact that he hasn't played much for the last 2 years because of COVID and injury. But then LSU imploded. LSU collapsed. They went from national champions to laughingstock, and the coach was an embarrassment, and it just completely fell apart, and it needed rebuilding. And it has been. I wouldn't have gone for the Notre Dame coach Brian Kelly to do it, but that's what they've gone for. And it needed completely restarting. And I think he's got caught up in that a little bit. But here's the thing, Kenny. It was often said the Seahawks wouldn't draft a cornerback early unless they were kind of like Patrick Peterson. But Derek Stingley at Spark, at the same size that he is now, ran a 4.30 40 and jumped a 42-inch vertical, and looked in that one season when they won the national championship like he was going to be the world's best cornerback. No exaggeration. Looked like an elite. Like if he'd have gone in the draft, then after that season, he'd have been potentially the number 1 or number 2 overall pick. That's how good he was. And it's worth remembering that the Seahawks could end up getting a player who a couple of years ago would have been a top 3 pick at number 9, and they could fill a cornerback spot that could be increasingly important by taking Stingley. So that's something to remember. And look, I think with the safety position, I don't think they're going to go anywhere near that. Because of what they've got there already. But there are some guys to like, and some special teams guys that are going to be good on day 3 there, Kenny. So I think I couldn't be more excited. This is for me, it's the most enjoyable draft class that I've written about since doing the blog.
And you went from 1, the first pick was 41 to 3 in the top 41. You went through that overnight, and getting that much more opportunity to talk about these guys, which is that's what's made me so excited to all of a sudden, finally, we can talk about these guys. And we can, and because this draft class, other than Aiden Hutchinson, and I realized, man, no, maybe by the time we get to the draft, I'm sure a couple other names will solidify themselves as definitely being drafted too high. But it's like we can talk about everybody except for Aiden Hutchinson, which is just like kind of amazing at 9. It may not, maybe some of those other names just aren't really realistic. But it seems like, that's open. I wanted to briefly touch back on the quarterbacks really quickly. Just to say, I unfortunately, and I'm sorry that it came true, but last year, you could start to get the sense that the Seahawks were maybe on the path of being the next Houston Texans, trading away 2 first-round picks for a player that wasn't really worth 2 first-round picks, winding up like sort of behind the 8 ball as the least talented roster in the division, and needing to rebuild when you couldn't. And that's, I think, part of the reason that the Seahawks tried to avoid becoming the Texans by trading Russell Wilson for a lot of assets that will allow them to get out of this talent hole a little bit faster, potentially, while taking the risks and not have a quarterback who can lead you to a Super Bowl, which obviously we see year after year after year, whether that guy was a 6th round pick like Tom Brady or a free agent like Tom Brady. It's like whatever you need someone out there that can like do a thing like Jack Coan, but like, which is lead you at the end. Matthew Stafford, for all of his faults, led the Rams to wins in the last 3 games, in the last couple of minutes, the last 4th quarter. Helped them maybe get into the hole sometimes, but at the end of the day, it did that. And the Houston Texans came away with Davis Mills last year in the 3rd round. Not a great quarterback, maybe the best rookie or the 2nd best rookie quarterback last year. Somebody that, I don't know that he's going to stop Houston's plans to find a franchise quarterback, but somebody that can be a bridge for no money. So yeah, if you can get a guy like that and you're the Seahawks in this draft, when I was tracking the quarterbacks last year, I got to the point where I was like, I'll rank 30 guys just for the hell of it. It may not be right, but I'll do it. And every time, other than my undying adoration for Grayson McCALLLLLL, who I just kept at 1 because why not? But every time somebody would start to get up to 2, 3, 4, whether it was Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett, and early on in the season, Keaton Slovis and Spencer Rattler and all these names, they just started dropping off. And anytime someone went up, they would drop off. Malik Willis would go up, and then he threw 3 interceptions in back-to-back games. And, it's like every time there was somebody. So there doesn't seem to be anyone in this class, I think, that just didn't eventually give you a reason to think like, and when I want my team to draft a quarterback to be the franchise quarterback, God damn if I can't ask that guy is a little bit flawless. It's like maybe it's not always going to be so perfect, but at least have those guys out there that make you go like, wow, this guy could really do it, other than what a lot of these quarterbacks this year seem to be, which is like, wow, if only we manage to do this and that, he'll be great. And it's like, I want to get rid of that if only, especially for the Seahawks to be in a position here to draft a player in the top 10 who is going to have a lot less question marks. So I think that getting a guy in the 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, whatever it is, to compete with Drew Lock and probably, maybe it's not going to be exciting. It'll be Geno Smith or Andy Dalton or something like that. But that's fine. I've looked at the Seahawks roster. I have bad news to report. It's not very good. And so it's like, don't put anyone in there that isn't ready to handle a very bad season. And maybe, it's just, if that's a Davis Mills type guy, I think that makes sense where Seattle's at. Maybe to end here on the last question, since we're at the point, you've got the Rebuild podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about sort of rebuilding, SeahawksDraftBlog.com, focusing here on the Seahawks rebuild. One of the big questions I think will have to be like, what's Pete Carroll and John Schneider's floor to keep this rebuild under their control 2023? How do Pete Carroll and John Schneider, do you think, survive this season? Do you think that they have enough control and enough relationship to prepare the front office enough to say, or, management, ownership, Jody Allen, whatever, hey, it's not that good? Because outwardly Pete Carroll is saying like, we're good. Everyone else is kind of like, maybe like, hey, look, this could be a 4-win team. Do you think that they can survive that?
That is interesting. That I would imagine that ownership they are supportive and understand what could happen here. Because if you trade away Russell Wilson and then ask John Schneider and Pete Carroll to spend a whole bunch of picks this year, which is, they're going to spend half of what you got for Wilson. They've already decided which players they want from Denver, and they're going to get half the picks this year. If you then say, it will be ridiculous ownership to say to them, whatever happens this season, okay, you initiated this trade. You got rid of Russell Wilson. You've then spent half the resources we got for Wilson. We're now going to get rid of you. We're going to bring somebody else in who has to deal with all of the players that you picked just a year ago. And we're only going to give them essentially what is an extra first and an extra second to try and reshape this in their own image. And they might not want the players that you drafted a year ago. I think that would be crazy from ownership's point of view. I think what they needed to do, if ownership were going to essentially judge Carroll and Schneider on this year, they needed to sort of make a call as to whether they had to go, and then another GM and coach had to make a decision on Russell Wilson and get sort of 3-4 years and think of this as a long-term project. By sticking with Carroll and Schneider and allowing them to make this trade, I think you've got to give them 3 years to essentially restructure this team and at least show some kind of progress over that 3-year period. Otherwise, there's no point. There was no point doing any of this. You know, they should have just said, keep Russell Wilson, don't trade him at all costs, and we expect better from you. And if you don't perform better, we're going to fire you next year, and they'll trade. We'll get a new coach and a new everything, and either they'll want to keep Wilson might want to stay, they might want to trade Wilson in that situation. I think they've made the bed. They've got to sleep in it now, the Seahawks, and that means that whether people won't like this because some people want Carroll and Schneider gone if they do badly next year. But I think even if they finish with the number 1 overall pick, Kenny, you've kind of got to stick with them now. You've got to let them see this through. I hate the idea of them spending 9, 40, 41, and then in a year's time somebody else being forced to work with that. I mean that's just, and they've reshaped everything. They're changing the defense to like a 3-4. They've got rid of the best asset. You know, you've invested in them now. You've got to let them do it. So I think that's it. I think that they've got to do it. And I completely agree with your previous point about the quarterback. You know, see if you can get it. I think Jack Coan can be your Davis Mills. Have him there as like your bridge, your player that's replaceable but decent, can maybe win you some games. I think that the Seahawks, if the Seahawks could win 7 games in 2010 and 2011, then I think they might win a few more than maybe people think this year. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a 6-7 win season. And to be honest, that would be quite an achievement given the way the roster looks now.
One of the benefits of the last place schedule too.
Yeah, yes, they've got a relatively straightforward schedule, so that will help them. So I think there's a chance they'll win that sort of 7 games again. And then people might go, well, that'll ruin the chances of a quarterback. But I wouldn't necessarily feel that way because they've got 2 firsts and 2 seconds next year. If they want to get up to get a quarterback, they can get up and get a quarterback, and they can include stock, you know, the next year as well. So if they really wanted to be aggressive, they can be aggressive. And who knows? In a year's time, they might decide if DK doesn't go this year and they traded him next year for a first and a second, let's say, you then might have 3 firsts and 3 seconds. That'd be ample to trade up, Kenny. So I think that even if they win a few games this year, they'll still be in position for quarterback if needs be.
Yeah, I mean, look at the quarterback movement now. We're in a new era of quarterback movement. So if the Seahawks happen to build a really good roster but need a quarterback, you never know who's going to be on the market, the trade market, the free agent market in a couple of years. So that's another new aspect to this as we've seen all these guys traded around.
Do you see Trevor Lawrence sticking in Jacksonville? Or if they have another bad year, what's he going to say next year?
He does. Yeah, that's a great point. Because to me, like, that was the biggest disconnect at all, is that I thought Trevor Lawrence, really good quarterback prospect, Jaguars, not a good team, never going to be a good team. So like, how does this work? I also like, with regards to, like, not only like the Seahawks are probably going to lose more games than they win. And if you bring in another guy next year, like, Pete Carroll also does things so much differently than most of the guys. Like, you can't just go out there then and target a Lincoln Riley, you know, not that he's going to leave USC after 1 year, but, you know, you can't target a guy who's so different schematically or with philosophies or everything, because what's Pete Carroll's number 1 goal this year? If anything, probably lead the league in rushing and lead the league in run defense, which not a lot of other people are going for right now. So it's like, that's kind of what I expect would be to see, you know, if Pete Carroll has his way, the team, you know, makes the playoffs. I believe he wants to make the playoffs. He wants to put out a good effort, just like he did in 2010, because winning that playoff game in 2010 with Marshawn Lynch and creating Beastquake could have also been a part of the formula that made Seattle what they were in 2012 and beyond. So you never know. I've never root for losing. I never root for tanking. Just based on the fact that you look at the 2010 Seahawks, there is things to be gained from like positive momentum. I don't really believe in momentum going into an off season, but positive things happening for your franchise. Like that felt like a tone setting moment that wouldn't have been possible if you're not playing in a terrible division.
Do you know, there's one correction to what I said earlier though, Kenny. I think what could happen is, let's just imagine a scenario which was speculated before the meeting, in quotes, between Jody Allen, Schneider and Carroll. There was a bit of talk that maybe Schneider would get more control. What if Schneider has got more control and is making the picks this year? If they have a really terrible season, I guess theoretically they could remove the head coach and keep the GM. So it's still the person who's made the picks, but the coach goes. That's a possibility where Carroll ends up, if they have a terrible year, Carroll gets fired, Schneider stays. Schneider then either appoints a new coach or they promote someone like Clint Hurt or something if they want some continuity. I don't know. But, that is, I guess, a possibility if they have a bad season, that they could get rid of one and not the other. But I still think generally, they're kind of in this together now. So we'll see. And look, I want the Seahawks to do well. What I'd love to see, Kenny, is some fantastic draft picks and a new, I want to see an exciting defense this year. I want to see a badass defense that gets after people, that rushes the passer, that is physical, that teams are scared to play against. Let's have some games where opponents they come to Seattle, they get beaten up, and then the next week, you remember that run where teams they'd always lose the game after they played Seattle? Let's have that again, because we've given them a thrashing. Even if we don't win the game, let's punish teams and be physical and create that mentality, so that in a year when we are spending a lot of time talking about quarterbacks, hopefully, because they haven't drafted one this year that's essentially all in on, we can say you insert that quarterback, you've got weapons, you've got a defense, and we can look forward to maybe playoff football again.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a very underrated aspect, I think, of the Sean McDermott rebuild with the Bills. They went out there before Josh Allen and during Josh Allen's bad years and got guys like Tre'Davious White and Tremaine Edmonds and, those incredible safeties and all that rebuilding that they did to that defense. Low key moves too, by the way, so it's like, if you think about it, if the Seahawks go out there with Jermaine Johnson and Daryl Taylor, it's a potentially formidable pass rushing duo that's both under 24 years old or whatever. And then I could see, because we saw Pete Carroll do things with Chris Clemens and Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett that nobody else had ever done with those guys before. So it would be interesting to see if that is on the precipice, if we're on the edge of that, if that's what's going to happen next. And I think like you could do Jermaine Johnson, or you could do an Ahmad Gardner and any of these guys where it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, because the goal is, wins are always a part of the goal, but we look at the Seahawks roster today, and if we say, like, who are the guys that you still want to be here in 3 years? And you go, oh, DK Metcalf, Quandre Diggs, who will be older at that point. But it's like not a very long list. But if in a year from now, before the next draft even, we can say, like, oh, man, Jermaine Johnson, Ryan Neal, Daryl Taylor, Poona Ford, I don't know, names is coming to mind, Damian Lewis. You just want that list to go up. Maybe they're not winning all their games, but if you got that list going up of like, who do you like? Who do you want to be here for another 3-4 years? Who's going to be a part of the championship eventually? Just like you did with Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, Russell Okung, all those guys, Golden Tate in the beginning years. Can they get those guys up? And like you say, maybe they win 7 or 8 games. And in the NFC, whether they like it or not, that might actually be a wild card. So, we would find out. The NFC West is a mess. I don't know. It's very interesting. This has been an excellent podcast, I think, for me, and I've learned so much. I'm gonna raise my standard here on Seaside Joe of really. I'm not going to be able to do scouting X's and O's and all that kind of stuff like you and these other guys, Tony Pauline and whatnot, and Mike Mayock. But I'm going to raise my standard here, making sure like I'm giving the best information I have access to, not pushing narratives, and really like locking into like what's fair, what's right, what's a realistic possibility. I'm still going to get hyped up maybe on some guys, but at the end of the day, making sure like, okay, like what's the best role that I can play as an amateur who just is excited about the draft every year. Rob, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Scott McLuhan said something last week that really stuck with me. He said, I am not an X's and O's guy. I'm a talent evaluator. And it really resonated with me because I have no idea about X's and O's. I don't know anything about it. I don't try and get into that kind of thing. I think a lot of people who do often trip themselves up because it's quite hard to sort of define what is actually the X's and O's and the formations and the decisions that teams are making without actually being there and being with the decision makers. And so often I see it on Twitter where somebody who's just sort of, somebody on Twitter saying they did this, and this, and then a player goes, actually, no, I think you'll find this, and this, because they've just got that sort of little bit of extra expertise with it. So I think what I would say is if you were a fan of the draft and you want to sort of get into it even more, I mean, like to an obsessive nature, which I think it's addictive. It's really addictive, the draft. It's just watch the games and try and do a bit of trial and error, with the things you get wrong. And also just try and understand or work out in your own mind what makes a good player at this position. What am I looking for when I'm watching this guy? And then when you've kind of identified what you're looking for, it becomes quite easy to sort of judge quite quickly in the process. Is this a good player? What kind of a range is this guy going to go? What's his potential? What's his upside? And the other thing quickly is it's always best to think about what a player can do, not what he can't do.
That's really so what a player can do, not what he can't do. Those traits there, it's like, oh, there's only 2 guys in the draft this year at this position who can do that, basically, right? What is because limitations, you can focus on limitations, and we've talked about some of them. We had a big conversation about Tyler Linderbaum on limitations. But ultimately, what I like to focus on is what does this guy do? If he doesn't do it, you just sort of acknowledge he doesn't do it. But really, like, I'm going to put this guy ahead of this guy because he does this. I'm not going to put this guy below here because he doesn't do it. It's what players can do, I think, that really matters, and that's how to focus on it. And I think if you do that, it's more fun because you're being more positive about it. That's great. That's great advice. And I think that's good for me. It's good for everyone out there listening. And I know I'm going to watch a ton more of highlights, footage, tape, whatever, videos online, your stuff. And I'll take that with me as I'm watching these players, because there's so many more that I need to get through. But plus, it's like I don't even feel like I know anything about what's going to happen in the second round. And that's not even me saying that I know what's going to happen in the first round. But yeah, it's like there's going to be a lot here going on. Rob Staton on Twitter at Rob Staton, Staton. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Rob, anything else? You've got the Rebuild podcast. Anything else you want to plug? Tell people where to go find you. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's undersubscribed compared to a lot of other channels. So it's just Rob Staton if you find it on YouTube, and subscribe. Please watch the Scott McCloughan interview, because I think I enjoyed doing it so much, and I like the fact that a lot of people have watched it. So if you haven't listened to it, please go and check it out. I think it's so fascinating to hear someone as respected as Scott McCloughan talking in detail about this process and the players that are in this draft coming up. So go and check that out. And then Rebuild podcast and SeahawksDraftBlog.com. It's a great community on there. So get involved, check it out, yell at me about things if you want. A lot of people do. I don't mind. Let's get into it. Absolutely. I'll have that link there for you guys listening or watching. I'll have that link for Rob's YouTube in the post for sure. But yeah, go to Rob Staton, Staton. It's the best. And great conversations to talk to guys like Scott McCloughan, for anyone listening out there, former executive with the Seahawks, former GM of the 49ers and the Washington team. And such a great, just considered maybe one of the greatest evaluators of all time, scouts, whatever you want to call it, one of the greatest. So that's fantastic. If you're here, maybe from Seahawks Draft Blog or from somewhere else on the internet, check out SeasideJoe.substack.com. I will post this also at the Seaside Joe YouTube channel and on the Seaside Joe Patreon, not Patreon, on the Seaside Joe Substack. There's so many websites now. Yeah. But I'll have that all up there now. I'm trying to get as many newsletter subscribers before the draft, because the interest just spiked unbelievably after the trade, and I want to ride that with all of you guys out there. So check out SeasideJoe.substack.com. Very interested in getting so much more, content out there for guys interested and for people out there interested in the draft and the Seahawks especially, and what happens next. So that's it for this episode of Seaside Joe. I'm Kenneth Arthur, and I don't have anything else really to plug. Thanks again to Rob Staton, and I'll be back here next time with another episode of this podcast with somebody else talking about the Seahawks. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.